Well, thank you. Welcome back. Just to tell a quick story. On Tuesday, I was walking my two grandchildren back from primary school, and my 10-year-old was full of the fact that she'd had an army lesson all about Islam, and she was full of all the things that she'd heard from this new teacher who was very enthusiastic. She was a white Englishman, but had lived abroad for a long time, and she was telling us all about the things that she'd learned. And her 5-year-old brother was quietly trotting along beside her, and after a little while, he just suddenly said, "Is he dead?" And so we said, "Is who dead?" "Islam. Is he dead?" And so my granddaughter was trying to explain a little bit about the finer points of Islam that she'd had a half-an-hour session on in her RE lesson. So she tried her best. But to make a serious point, many of us in our different faith traditions have our heads down and so involved in our own little world that we perhaps don't know a great deal more about Islam and the traditions that Muslims carry on through their daily lives than my 5-year-old grandson. And I think if we're hoping to achieve any kind of just peace, we need to have much more dialogue and understand the point of view of the other, and to be able to work together from our own perspectives, but recognizing all our differences, but recognizing even more importantly all the things that we have in common. And from that end, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome our speaker for this afternoon, because at a time when we're surrounded by conflict, lack of understanding, tolerance, and respect for those whose vision and values seem unfamiliar, that we need to listen to the stories of others. And in order to achieve a just peace, we must focus on relationship building. And we can only do that with any degree of success if we're open to learning more about each other. So Dr. Chris Hewer comes from a background in Christian theology, education, Islamic and interfaith studies, and has worked with Muslims in Britain and Christian-Muslim relationships since 1986. First in Selly Oak in Birmingham, and then as an advisor on interfaith relations to the Bishop of Birmingham. And then he was the St. Ethelbert Fellow in Christian-Muslim relationships in London, and with a brief to deliver adult education courses, study days, and talks all around Greater London. And his current work is to teach study days and residential courses, and to develop written and electronic resources to be available for consultation. And Dr. Hewer has created resources for GCSERE syllabus on the Islam module. So I've been lucky enough to hear Dr. Hewer speak on a number of occasions, always in my hometown of Chesterfield, and he's managed to bring together people from a wide range of Christian experience with members of the Muslim community, either in a large Methodist church building, an Anglican parish church, as well as a small Catholic chapel dating from Norman times, now managed by a charitable trust. And he's managed to conduct long sessions where everybody has been totally engaged. As I say, we've had Christians, evangelical Christians, all manner of hats of Christians, and local Muslim people as well. And he's been able to engage everybody in dialogue and fellowship. So he's written many papers and books and is an engaging speaker. And I'm really sure we'll gain much by hearing what he has to share with us this afternoon. So the title of Dr. Hewer's presentation is The Abrahamic Faith, Defining, Building, and Maintaining a Just Peace. So Dr. Hewer will speak for around 40 minutes, and then Jeff and Paul will facilitate the question and answer session. So Chris, you're very welcome, and over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Anne, and welcome to everybody. Good afternoon. It's nice to see one or two familiar faces as well as people who are new. And as Anne has just indicated, I spend my life trying to build bridges of understanding, mainly between Christianity and Islam. And this afternoon, what I want to try to do is to explore this concept of peace between within each of the three different Abrahamic faiths. And as we are a Christian group, I'm going to assume that we know a little bit more about Christianity than we do about Judaism and Islam. So I'll spend a bit more time talking about Judaism and Islam, and then I'll come on to Christianity third. Now, there is a book, and I've put the details of this book onto the chat. And as you will see, it's quite a thin book, and it's called The Concept of Peace in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And it comes from a German university, the University of Erlangen, where they have a specialist center looking at key concepts in interreligious discourses. And I thought that it was the most appropriate small book to give you as a resource. Now, I have to tell you, it's not bedtime reading. It's quite hard going at times, and it repays some careful reading. But it is the kind of thing that if one really wants to get into what these three faiths are trying to say about peace, it's the best single little book that I know. And interestingly, the writer on Christianity is a German Lutheran, so it gives one an additional dimension in trying to understand the Lutheran perspective also on peace and peace building. And he gives a very interesting historical sketch. The writer on Islam is one of the most prominent women Muslim scholars working now in America, who has a very considerable book on the concept of jihad and misunderstandings. And the writer on Judaism is a Scot by birth who has worked in Israel for the last 40 years and works at the Hebrew University there. So all three of them are serious scholars coming from their own traditions. So it repays careful study. However, I'm going to attempt to give you some insight into what they have to say without you having to read the whole of the book just now. So let's begin with Judaism. And the concept of peace in Judaism is tied up very much with the idea of the Messiah and messianic peace, so that peace will come in the time of the Messiah. We often will use the term shalom, the Hebrew word, and often we will translate that as peace. But like many of these Hebrew and Arabic terms, actually it has many different shades of meaning and lots of different depths of meaning. So we can best translate it as wholeness and completion. In other words, the human being and the whole of creation comes to wholeness and completion through faith, through the peace which God alone can give. And I want to just read a little quotation here from Alex Isaac's section of this book. He defines peace in this way. He says, the resolution of all internal and external conflict in the human soul, in intimate relations, in the family, the community, the Jewish people, international politics, nature, and indeed between all human beings and God. Now that then is his description of what shalom really means. You can see a completely comprehensive term. He goes on to look at three aspects of this messianic peace. And he says that these three aspects are what he calls anti-politics, unity of opposites, and knowledge of God. So if we think first of anti-politics, you see, when politicians talk about peace, what they're talking about essentially is about compromise and negotiation, and it is of course tied up with the use of power. I am a better negotiator for peace when I have got the power to do something and to back up my words. This then, Judaism would say, is an earthly concept. That is not the concept of messianic peace. Rather, messianic peace is a spiritual concept which comes about through the deep spiritual obedience of all people through their free choice, both as a shared obligation, both individual and collective, and it comes about through following the guidance of God, which as far as Judaism is concerned is of course the Torah. So it is not about negotiated peace, the peace of politicians, the peace of this world. Rather, it is about a spiritual transformation of the heart. And then Jewish scholars would go on to point to that phrase that we would be familiar with from the scriptures, circumcision of the heart. Now, circumcision of the heart is about this inner transformation. This inner transformation that requires that we come to a recognition of the presence of God in all creation. So God is not distant, as it were. God withdraws from the creation, but God is not distant from it. And so recognizing this messianic peace is a recognition of the presence of God in the whole of creation. And if we recognize that presence, it is then a spiritual communion, if you like. Now, a communion with God, which necessarily implies a communion also within the created order. So peace is both vertical peace with God and also peace within the created order. And the scholars speak of this as being a coming together of human consciousness with an awareness of God. Now, Isaacs here draws a parallel, a distinction between the covenant that God makes with the people and the Tower of Babel. Now, you remember the Tower of Babel is when human beings get above themselves and assert their own self-reliance. We can make a tower, we can go into the heavens, we can in effect become God. So the Tower of Babel then is identified with a spirit of self-reliance on human knowledge. Now, Isaacs contrasts that with the idea of covenant, because the idea of covenant is to live in the presence of the divine, to have within ourselves that awareness that we constantly live in the presence of God, and to allow that, therefore, to influence and to give shape to the whole of our relationship with God, which will result in peace. So peace is something toward which we work through this inner human transformation. the next concept that he wants to bring to our attention is about faith and trust in God, because peace is the product of that faith and trust. And so he draws to our attention Abraham. Now, you remember the story that Abraham is called by God and he is told what he is to leave behind. Leave your family, leave your traditions, leave your father's house, leave your land. But he's not told what he's going to go to. Go to the place that I will show you. Now, he then goes forth in faith and trust. Faith in God and trust that God will bring about God's promise to bring him to a new life, to bring him to that which God will show him. So peace is an act of trust and faith in God. We do not yet know what it will look like, but we know that it is with God and that God will lead us to it. That's the idea. Now, the next model that Isaac gives us is to go back to Adam and Eve, because the fall of Adam and Eve, going for the knowledge of the tree of good and evil, is seen in Jewish understanding as being going for human knowledge, and again, usurping that knowledge, which should be the knowledge with God. So instead of trusting in God and God's guidance, the knowledge of good and evil, Adam and Eve opting for human knowledge instead. And again, in all these models that he gives us, we can see that we're moving a long way away from the idea of political peace building, of negotiation and compromise, the art of the possible, as the politicians say, and instead we're going forward to a spiritual transformation in faith, hope, and trust in God. So that's the first characteristic he gives us. Now, the second characteristic he gives us, I want to illustrate with the 11th chapter of the writings of the prophet Isaiah. And I'm going to use here the Jewish English translation of the Hebrew Bible, which has slight differences because it will help to keep us awake with something with which we're not so terribly familiar. You will recognize the story. And there shall come forth a shoot out of the stock of Jesse, and a twig shall grow forth out of his roots, and the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. And his delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. And he shall not judge after the sight of his eyes, neither decide after the hearing of his ears. But with righteousness he shall judge the poor, and decide with equity for the meek of the land. He shall smite the land with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips shall he slay the wicked. Now you can see that we're talking here about the Messianic period, the period of true peace, which can only come in the time of the Messiah. And it brings about this transformation, which we can now see in the unity of opposites. So the passage goes on, and righteousness shall be the girdle of his loins, and faithfulness the girdle of his reins. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid. The calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and a child shall lead them. And the cow and the bear shall feed. Their young ones shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like an ox. The suckling child shall play on the hole of the asp, and the weaned child shall put his hand on the basilisk's den. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. So this second portion is all tied up with the unity of opposites. God unifies the diversity of creation. So the creation is diverse. It comes not only to its fullness and completion in God, but it comes then to that state of peace which ultimately only God can bring, the wholeness, the unity of the diversity of creation. This then brings us to an important understanding from the Jewish perspective. Ultimately, everything is God. Nothing is other than God. God existed, there was nothing else, as Genesis tells us. God creates everything in the creation. But God existed before the creation began, and ultimately there will be, as it were, a full circle, and we will go back to that state in which everything is God and nothing is other than God. Therefore, the diversity is united in the unity of God. So in this life, in our normal world, we perceive duality, light and dark, hot and cold, lion and lamb, and so on. Whereas in the Messianic peace, all will return to God who is one. Now, the oneness of God here does not mean sameness. It does not mean uniformity, but it means a unity. So Isaac draws the comparison and says, politics, negotiation, aims for sameness, aims for the common denominator. Whereas the unity of opposites means that diversity tends to oneness. And so peace does not mean that all diversity is removed, rather that that diversity is subsumed into the oneness of God in the Messianic period. And then the third element that he brings before us, he calls the knowledge of God. Now, knowledge here isn't a head event. Knowledge is the total commitment of the whole of the person. Knowledge is the heart, is intuition, the total gift. So you remember in some of the older English translations of the Bible, we would have said that man X knew his wife Y. And this knowledge then, this is what we're talking about, the total self-gift. Now, this total self-gift of oneself in knowledge means to submerge oneself, one's whole consciousness into God. So peace comes about when the human being submits, submerges, totally gives over consciousness to God. so that all being shall be perceived as being in God. Now, we have other images here which are used in the scriptures. We have the image of the one body and the many limbs or the many organs, the many parts of that body. And so we have an understanding of the unity of many parts coming together in the knowledge of God. So the world in all its diversity is a unified expression of God's wholeness, or God's shalom, God's peace. So we can see that in Judaism, this concept of peace then is the most all-consuming heart of the relationship between God, the individual, the collective, and the whole of creation, in which all are conscious of their place before God. Moving now to Islam. Arabic is a language like Hebrew, which is made up of 3-letter roots. So you have a root consisting of 3 letters, and then you make words by putting vowels into those letters. So we have the root SLM, which means that state in which God created the whole of creation. That state which is characterized by perfect peace, by justice, by safety, by security, everything in its rightful place, due order. That is the state in which God created the world, the state in which God wants the world to live. So God wants the world to live in this state of ultimate peace. Now, you know that Islam never sees itself as being a new religion that begins in the 7th century with Prophet Muhammad, but rather as the last edition of the eternal religion, the perennial religion, which goes right back to Adam and Eve. So God creates the world in the state of perfect peace. Adam and Eve are created in that state. God gives them guidance on how to live the way of perfect peace, the way of God. Now, that is the meaning of the word Islam. So Islam is one of those words built around these 3 letters, S-L-M, then you put an I in, I-S-L-A-M, Islam. In the same way that you can make the word Muslim, M-U-S-L-I-M. And in the same way, you can make the Arabic word for peace, which is salam, S-L-S-A-L-A-M. So peace is God's religion, as it were. Everything living in justice according to the way of God, according to the great Creator's plan. If we live according to justice, if we live according to a consciousness of ourselves being creatures of God, living in the presence of God, this will bring us into the state of peace. So again, peace is a spiritual destiny, a spiritual dignity which is there for all human beings, which requires justice, which requires God consciousness, and which requires us to struggle and work toward it. Now, salam then is this concept of peace. So when two Arabic speakers meet, two Muslims or an Arabic-speaking Christian and a Muslim, for example, they will greet each other, salam alaikum. May you come ever more fully and completely into that state of perfect peace, which is to live in total harmony with God and with the whole of creation. So no finer greeting could one give than to give the greeting of salam, of peace. And indeed, one of the beautiful names of God is as-salam, that is the one who is in himself peace. Now, we need to move toward this peace, and it requires two things. The first thing is it requires an inner struggling within myself, because if peace does not live within myself, I am not going to create peace in the world. I have to struggle. This is the meaning of the word jihad. And in her piece here, Afsaruddin, the author of this piece in the book, gives a long section on the true meaning of the word jihad, and therefore on that other aspect of jihad, which is how to limit any kind of fighting between human beings. Now, jihad then is struggling. So the way that Islam sees it is that if you are in an airport and you're going toward the gate from which you will board your aeroplane, very often you will go along a moving walkway. Now, life is like going along a moving walkway in the wrong direction. If you stand still, you will be taken backwards. In order to maintain your place, you must keep moving forwards. In order to make progress, you've got to struggle and strive to go forwards. And that's the meaning of the word jihad. Therefore, to build peace requires an inner struggling within the individual, struggling against my temptations, against my weaknesses, against my lower self, as it were. So peace in this sense is the product of this inner struggle. Now, from the inner struggle, we come to the outer dimension, and the outer dimension is justice. In Islam, justice is the primary ethic. The world will be a better place for the more justice that is in it. Do justice, the Quran says, even if it goes against yourself. So justice is the fundamental ethical principle that will promote peace in the outer dimension of the world. We will come to the fullness and abiding nature of peace in paradise. Paradise is often called in Islam the abode of peace. And we're told that in paradise, the greeting will be the greeting of peace. Salam alaikum, peace be with you. So ultimately, we reach our total submission to God in paradise, and there we will live in the constant state of peace. However, in our struggling on this earth during this life, we are struggling towards that. Now, together with peace go the two virtues of patience and of gentleness. There are some things you cannot change, you must be patient. Change will come eventually, so patience becomes a high order virtue. Gentleness becomes a high order virtue in the pursuit of peace, because only through living that peaceful, gentle, irenic way can one strive to build peace as opposed to building conflict or the abuse of power. So we have a verse in the Quran that tells us that when the foolish people jeer at you, respond to them with greetings of peace. You are going to change the hearts of people with goodness, not with a smack in the mouth. Peace is to be created between all human beings. The Quran tells us that every human being is created, quote, in the best of molds. In other words, we are created in the best that God can manage as a human being. We as a human being are created in the best of forms, the best of molds that God can give us. Every human being, there is no distinction to be made between human beings according to Islam. No distinction in terms of tribalism, ethnicity, race, or religion. The best of you is the one who is most God conscious, the Quran tells us. So that ultimate religion, the religion of God, the religion of peace, is accessible for all human beings. Islam, and based on the Quran and the teaching of Muhammad, is the last edition of that perennial guidance. So you are to make peace between all human beings, because peace is the ultimate dignity of the human being. The Quran again tells us in another verse, repel what is evil with something better. So how do you build peace? You build peace by overwhelming the evil with good. You're constantly wanting to push back the boundaries of evil by something better. And in another place, the Quran tells us, if somebody greets you with a greeting, you are to respond with something better. So if I greet you, peace be with you, then you respond, may peace and the mercy of God and the blessing of God be upon you. So you are to respond with something better. And in this way, we repel evil on the earth with the God-given gift of peace. And finally, one of the duties of the human being as the representative of God upon earth, every human being is to be the agent, the representative, the regent of God upon earth. And in this function, we are to, quote, reconcile hearts. We are to bring diversity and difference and animosity together and to reconcile them into what is good. And these verses about reconciling hearts were revealed in the early days of Islam, when Muhammad, with his group of traders, the first Muslims, migrated to Medina, where they were farmers and agriculturalists. Now, Muhammad paired the two of them together, a merchant with an agriculturalist. You share your merchanting skills with this one who will share agricultural skills with you. And in this way, the two hearts shall be reconciled. So again, no tribalism, no racism, but the reconciliation of hearts between human beings and between God and humankind. So much for Islam. Now, as I said, I shall spend less time talking about Christianity on the assumption that we are all rather more familiar with that. I just want to give you some models, some formulae that I draw from the Christian tradition and from the writer of our piece here in this book. How do we express peace in Christian terminology? And I suggest that we call it, or we speak of it, as God's salvation experienced on the earth. God's salvation, that is, God's bringing to new life. Salvation means the gift of life. God's salvation experienced here on this earth. Therefore, this peace is a divine gift. It is not something that we create, but something that is freely given by God and freely received by the human being. Freely you have received, freely you are to give. Therefore, we are to share the peace of Christ in the world. The product of this reconciliation between God and human beings, which has been brought about by Christ, is this brotherly, sisterly love between human beings. You are to love your neighbor, your brother, your sister as a member of your one human family. And if I can be apposite of what's going on in the world at the moment, we are experiencing a situation in which some countries in Eastern Europe have been doing great work, bringing in hundreds and thousands and indeed millions of Ukrainian refugees on the basis that they are white, European and Christian like us. And some of those countries still have great walls of barbed wire and all sorts of fencing in order to keep out other human beings who are also refugees fleeing war and persecution on the basis that they don't share our race and they don't share our religion. So we need to be very careful. One of the paraphrases that I use from the teaching of Jesus is to say, if you only love those who look like you or who are of your same ethnicity or religion, what is special and what good is that? Even the heathens do as much, do they not? If you only love those who love you, etc. And so, very important then, this idea of God's salvific peace renders all human beings on a par of brothers and sisters. Now, this state of peace can only come about when justice reigns. Justice can only come about when the Messiah comes. So what distinguishes Christianity and Christian understandings of peace from Judaism is that Christians understand Jesus is the Messiah. We now live in the Messianic times. This means that that Messianic peace is not only accessible to us now, but it is our duty to work toward it, to unveil it, to make it present in the world, that it should flow through us. This peace of Christ for the Christian comes to fulfillment in the kingdom of God. And of course, in Christian understanding and theology, the kingdom of God is both future and present. The kingdom of God is yet to come in all its fullness, but it is also here present amongst us now. This would lead us then, the Christian theologians would tell us, to live now according to the mores, or the principles of the kingdom of God right now, which means to live according to the principle of messianic peace. The Christian scholars here draw a distinction between what they call negative peace and positive peace. Negative peace is that peace of the politicians, it's the absence of war, whereas positive peace is when justice and righteousness shall come amongst the people and shall reign with the people. So we are not into the world of limiting ourselves to the absence of war and negative peace. The German Catholic bishops released a statement a little while ago in which they spoke of the church as being a sacrament of peace. A sacrament of peace which makes present an unseen reality in the world through the twin principles, the twin activities of dialogue, talking things through, discourse, discussion, and diaconia, that is the service of those who are in need in the world. So the church as the sacrament of peace is the model given us by the German Catholic bishops. And finally, how do we prepare for this peace? How do we build this peace? Well, this is through those principles of things like international law, of just policing, of good governance, and of networking between peoples. So in all these ways, we can see that we are laying, as it were, the foundations for peace to come in its fullness. So thank you very much. I think I have spotted some questions have come up in the chat, but I'll hand over to Jeff now, who's going to negotiate all that.
Sorry, just trying to unmute. Right, hi, right. Yeah, we've got one question in the chat. So Riaz Islam, if the Quran teaches peace, where do fundamentalists receive their messages from? What struggle do they think they're striving towards?
Well, they receive those messages from misreading the text of the Quran, just as throughout Christian history, Christians have seen themselves enabled to resort to violence and to fighting through misreading verses of the Christian scriptures. And so it is perfectly possible to read verses of the Quran in such a way that people then think that gives them the mandate for fighting and for violence, and indeed for the kind of atrocities that we have seen in recent times in the world. You will know that one of the catastrophes of the present situation in Russia is that the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, the Patriarch Kirill, is strongly and forcibly standing behind Putin in his actions, to such an extent that Rowan Williams has now called for the Russian Orthodox Church to be suspended from the World Council of Churches. And he, together with other Christian leaders, have actually called out Patriarch Kirill and said that he is not a worthy person to be leading that church when he will not speak against the atrocities being done by Russian forces and the Russian political leadership. So it's always possible for religious leaders to justify all sorts of ungodly things. Remember that we have justified slavery, we have justified apartheid, we have justified men's superiority over women, and drawn from the scriptures justification for those things. Now, in the same way, there are Muslims who are doing the same thing in order to justify their atrocities in the world today. In just the same way that Rowan Williams calls out the Patriarch Kirill, so in the same way, Muslim scholars have got together to call out the un-Islamic conduct of these fanatics, these terrorists, these extremists in the Muslim world. They are, of course, a tiny percentage of Muslims worldwide, but if somebody is prepared to act with that degree of barbarity and savagery, then the smallness of your number does not limit the amount of harm you can cause. If you want to see what Islam thinks about them, then I suggest that you Google letter to Baghdadi. Letter as in writing, to Baghdadi, as in Baghdad with an I on the end. Now, the Baghdadi in question here is Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who is the man who set himself up to be the caliph, as he called himself, of the so-called Islamic State. And you will remember that all sorts of atrocities were committed by that so-called Islamic State, which included, you know, the execution of prisoners, of slavery, of torture, of sex slavery, of driving people out of their homes, of indiscriminate killing, and that letter comprises 24 sections. It's not hugely long, but it's got 24 sections. And it deals with every single thing that the Islamic State did, or the so-called Islamic State. And then it proves why it was totally forbidden in Islam, according to the Quran, according to the teaching of Muhammad, and according to 1400 years of Islamic scholarly thought. And it does that with all 24 sections, saying this is forbidden in Islam. And this document was then circulated amongst Muslim scholars worldwide, and they countersigned it. Now, that's how authority works within Islam. There are no popes or bishops or councils or synods. What you do is that one scholar or one group of scholars draws up a statement, a document like this, and then it's passed around amongst other scholars. Now, if this document is signed by one scholar, that gives it a certain strength. If it's signed by 10, it's stronger. By 100, it's stronger still. And by 1,000, well, you've got to be pretty stupid not to think that that's a very firm statement of Islamic belief. And in this way, we can come to some understanding of these extremists then. What do they think they're fighting for? They think they're fighting for world domination. They think that they have got a mandate from God, expressed in the Quran, to give them world domination, to force people into obedience to their way of thinking, otherwise they will kill them. Now, it's very important to remember with the Islamic State, so-called Islamic State, in Syria, in Iraq, in that region, far more Muslims were killed by them than anybody else. Far more Muslims than Christians, Yazidis, Jews, secular people, whatever. Vastly more Muslims. Why? Because their way of thinking usurped the role of God. The Quran tells us only God knows the human heart, therefore only God can stand in ultimate judgment over human beings. In their way of thinking, we are the only true believers. We are able to judge human beings. If you say you're a Muslim, but you don't join our group, that is proof positive that you are not a true Muslim, and therefore we may kill you. And not only may we kill you, but we may kill all those that you have influenced, because clearly you are not influencing them in the right direction. And so we see that ultimate perversion. This is the usurpation of the right of God. Now, you can't get much more serious than that. That is what they're doing, condemned by their own scholars from the rest of the worldwide Muslim community. They are doing it on the basis of twisting and misreading verses of the Quran, and they are seeking in this way a kind of world domination. It's one of the great tragedies of our times, but it is a reality. And we can look back in history and see that some other religions, not the least Christianity, have used elements of their biblical teaching and of their theological tradition to perpetrate some pretty awful things around the world as well, including gaining political power. So that's a rough approximation of an answer, but it would take us a lot longer to go through it in full detail. So I don't know if there are any more questions in the chat, or if there are any hands that want to be raised, or microphones that want to be switched on. I'm very welcome.
So, Chris, Post Southgate here, you would agree then with the late Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs when he says that fundamentalism, like imperialism, is the attempt to impose a single truth on a plural world. He says it is the Tower of Babel of our time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that, you see, that's fundamental Jewish teaching, that God is the reconciliation of diversity, not the imposition of the Tower of Babel. I mean, the Tower of Babel is a human construct. Fundamentalism is a human construct. And fundamentalism is saying there is one exclusive way, and we not only have it, but we have a duty to impose it. And that is our problem. You know, the reality is that most of us Christians today would say that Jews are worshipping God. It's not always been like this, of course, especially in our European Christian heritage. But most of us today would say Jews are worshipping God. And yet, fundamentally, Jews understand God differently to the way that Christians understand God. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. And yet it seems to be that God can live with that. And God can accept the worship, both of Jews and of Christians, who are fundamentally conceiving of God in different ways. There's a very nice story told by one of the Sufi, the Muslim mystics. And a bunch of Muslims reach the pearly gates, as it were, and they encounter God. And God says, "How do you do, lads? I'm God." And they say, you know, oh, we take refuge in God away from you. You must be Satan. We know what God looks like, and it's not like you. So God says, okay, what did you expect me to look like? So they then tell him what they expected God to look like. And God then transforms himself into what they were expecting. And they all bow down and they say, oh, now we're worshiping God. And then God transforms himself back into what God really is. So there is always this tendency then, this fundamentalism, which is a totalitarian absolutism, whether it be in Islam or in Christianity. And remember, the term fundamentalist and fundamentalism in theological terms was created for Christians. It was created for those Christians of the southern states of America who took the Bible in its most literal form, assuming that God was King James, as it were, because they weren't dealing with the original scriptures in Hebrew or in Greek, but rather with the King James version. So that's fundamentalism, and that is indeed like the Tower of Babel, a human construction to try to pretend that we're God. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris. Okay, while we're waiting for the next question, I have another one. I could keep you going all day.
Great.
Chris. What I'm keen to know to pick your brains about original sin.
Yeah.
Christians have this concept of original sin from the same scriptures as Muslims and Jews. Do they have a similar concept to original sin, or do they see things differently to Christians?
Well, I'm not an expert on Judaism, so let me say that first of all.
Okay, Muslims.
Okay, one word, however, about Judaism, because I couldn't be short of a word. Remember that Isaac's in his piece here likens the sin of Adam and Eve going for the tree of goodness, the knowledge of goodness and evil, as a kind of a human reliance, a self-reliance on our knowledge instead of submission and following the guidance of God. Now, I think that's how we would see original sin in Judaism, as it were, a slipping away from the original goodness of reliance on God into self-reliance, and the redemption of that original sin is moving back from self-reliance to reliance on God. That's the messianic piece. Islam, I know a bit more about. And let me try to tease out what we mean by original sin, because it is, of course, a misnomer. It is not sin in the same way that it is when I go around with my machine gun killing human beings. The way that Christians would see it is like this. We have a beautiful vase that is the God-created order. That vase is broken through the sin of Adam and Eve. Now, once that vase is broken, no matter how carefully and with what skill you try and put it back together again, no matter how wonderfully well you can do it, there are always going to be flaws in that vase. You can never bring the vase back to the original state that it was in before it was broken. Now, those flaws in creation are what Christian theologians call original sin. Once sin enters the world, you can't get it out again. That's the way that Christians understand the relationship. Therefore, hence the need for a savior, as it were, to put right what individual Christians and Christians individual humans and humans collectively cannot put right. Now, an Islamic model. Beautiful vase, Adam and Eve commit what Muslim scholars call the error of judgment. They're very wary of the use of sin here. The error of judgment that results in them being sent to the earth from paradise. They, however, after a period of time, come to a recollection or an understanding of what they have done, and therefore they seek the mercy and forgiveness of God. So vase broken, vase restored by God and not by human beings. And God is capable of restoring that vase to the state that it was in originally. So there is no flaw in the vase, therefore there is no doctrine of original sin. Now, if you do not have a doctrine of original sin, you do not need a savior motif. There is nothing that you can't put right yourself. So Islam does not recognize the concept of savior. I, you, every human being is capable of living a godly life, truly in obedience and submission to God's guidance. There is no flaw in that system. And that's where Islam doesn't have a doctrine of original sin.
Thank you.
If I could just say, using that idea of a broken vase, for some reason I'm struck with the Japanese art of things being more beautiful when they're glued together. And could it be that the glue is the wonderful sort of opportunity for Christ to come to earth and redeem us?
That worked very well, Sue, in a Christian theological pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Because my destiny is not to become like Adam. My destiny is to become like Christ.
Yes.
And so the journey, if you like, of salvation is not to give me the life of the Garden of Eden, but to give me the life of the garden of union with God. Now, you will know that the Christian theologians use the term here, the theological term theosis. Theosis in Greek means becoming divine. In Latin, or in the Latin church, we've often used the term of deification or divinization. In other words, human destiny in Christian understanding is not to become like Adam, but it is to be united with God in the same way that Jesus Christ, the second person of the Trinity, is united with God. So Christ is the firstborn of many brothers and sisters. We are other Christs, alter Christi. So I am growing into my true, fully human nature, which is the nature of Christ, which is to be both fully human and fully divine. And so my end destiny is not to become another Adam, it's another Christ. Now, in this sense, as it were, you know, I liberally interpret your metaphor of the glue. I mean, the glue adds something. And what's added in the restoration of the vase in the Christian tradition is to bring us, as it were, into the unity of divinity and humanity, which is the work of Christ in humankind. So the incarnation fundamentally changes or fundamentally reveals the true destiny of what it is to be human. How's that? Adrian is there.
Okay, yeah. My question is, if I've understood you correctly, I think you're saying that the concept of jihad, holy war, is a distortion of Islam. You can tell me in a minute if I've misunderstood that. But if that's the case, I suppose my question becomes, is there a situation under any of these religions where there can be a just war? So in Christianity, can we have a just war? And where does that, if so, where does it begin? So for example, presumably it's not acceptable for us to go around invading countries and making them Christian. But if countries are invading us and trying to make us Muslim, are we allowed to resist? And equally, therefore, if that were to happen to Muslims, would they be allowed to resist under those circumstances? And kind of where does it start? Or is all war wrong? That's the question under those religions.
Okay. Well, the first thing to say is the term jihad cannot be translated as holy war. War is never holy. War may be the ultimate lesser of two evils if the consequence of not opposing evil is that evil comes to reign and dominate the world, as it were. So it's never a holy act as far as Islam is concerned. Under extreme circumstances, it may be a necessary act. Secondly, jihad means to struggle and strive, first of all within myself, secondly within the society in which I live. So there is no allowance in Islam for what we could call a laissez-faire approach to society. I'm all right, I'm righteous, stuff the rest of you. That's not permissible in Islam. Because if I am at peace with God, if I am in subservience, in harmony with God, then I am also to share that in the creation. Therefore, I am to do justice in the world. I am to make the world a better place. I am to make the world a better place through my hands, through my tongue and my pen, and through the gift of my life, through the heart. Now, I am to oppose the onward march of evil. I am to repel evil by something which is better. So I'm to do all those things. I am to struggle and strive in the path of righteousness and justice and uprightness and truth. And ultimately, what do you do when evil is still marching down the streets? You know, this is, as it were, 1930s Germany, when evil is marching down the street. And everything you've tried does not turn it back. And the consequence of not turning it back will be the desecration and the degradation of human life. Not just your life, but the life of human beings. Well, Islam is ultimately not pacifist in this situation. It says that when everything else has been tried and failed, it may be necessary, even though you hate it, quoting the Quran here, even though you hate it, that you take up arms to resist the onward march of evil because of the consequence of not doing so. Now, this is the most ultimate act that any human being can ever take on, because I am prepared to take the life of another human being. And therefore, Islam cocks and boxes around this a whole set of limitations and provisos and prescriptions, and that's where you would come to your just war theory. So remember that the just war theory, according to Western understanding, comes first of all from Cicero, then it comes to Augustine, and then it comes to Thomas Aquinas, and it's refined a little in the process. It is matched in what are called the rules of encounter for fighting, war, and the opposition of evil, which is jihad, fighting in Islam. And they are as follows. It must be the ultimate last resort. The consequence of not opposing, of not fighting, must be the desolation of human life and human living. It must therefore be a defensive action. It doesn't need to be self-defensive. I can come to your defense, because the consequence of not doing that is going to be the desolation of human living. It must be called by legitimate authority. In other words, I cannot call a jihad, I cannot call fighting. This must be done, for example, by the caliph, the worldwide leader of Muslims worldwide, or whoever. Now that's very difficult in the state of the state of the divisions amongst Muslims worldwide. You know that during the 20th century, largely through the influence of the European imperial powers, you have divided up the worldwide Muslim community into lots and lots of little nation states. And so how to get a collective voice amongst them? Well, it's harder than getting a collective voice out of the United Nations, for goodness sake. So that sort of scale. So it must be called by legitimate authority. It must be a collective action. I can't declare jihad myself and go off and do things. Now, when it comes to fighting, there are three principles of all fighting, both war and jihad. The first is that you must discriminate between combatants and non-combatants. Non-combatants must not be killed, attacked, or intimidated. And non-combatants classically come under 5 headings. Those are women, children, the elderly, the sick, and the surrendered prisoner. They must not be killed, they must not be intimidated or threatened. So in modern terminology, we could say that fighting must be restricted to combatants, to men, and these days women in uniform, as it were. Secondly, it must be proportional. You must use minimum force. You are not allowed to take the proverbial sledgehammer to crack the nut. Thirdly, you may not bring about a human or environmental catastrophe. Now, in 7th century terms, that would mean you're not allowed to poison a water supply. You're not allowed to destroy food crops, either in the field or in the barn. And you are not allowed to cut down trees. Now, in 21st century terms, those are weapons of mass destruction because they are indiscriminate, because they cause human and ecological catastrophe. They cannot be contained or controlled. Therefore, as far as Muslim scholars are concerned, weapons of mass destruction, biological, chemical, nuclear, are forbidden. Now, having done all that, and if you've passed all those tests, then it may be necessary that every able-bodied man takes up arms to resist the onward march of evil, because the consequence of not doing so is human desolation. So we could call this then a doctrine of non-violence, limited use of violence, but not of pacifism.
Got it.
If pacifism is defined as under no circumstances will I use force, according to, for example, in Christian religious terms, to Quaker or Mennonite or Anabaptist teaching.
That's very helpful and informative. Simplistically, then, they're kind of similar, aren't they? The concept of just war under Christianity and the equivalent under Muslim is effectively similar.
It is extremely similar.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, I always hesitate to say if the two are exactly the same, because we can probably find a fact paper to put in there somewhere, but they are extremely similar.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very, very much. Anne, before I say the prayer, would you like to offer our thanks to Chris, please? Oh, you're on mute, Anne.
So, yes, just looking in the chat, just a few things. Excellent speaker. Need to go and pick up the grandkids. Excellent presentation. Thank you for a wonderful talk. Truly brilliant. And it goes on. So the difficulty is, isn't it? We know all this, and we still have such difficulty in getting it all right. But I'd just like to say thank you for your wonderful presentation and for challenging us to make us think, particularly about the whole concept of a just war, which is so difficult at this moment in time, when we're certainly not getting the kind of messianic messages from our political leaders. And as you say, it's the power struggle and the power struggle between those who already have so much power, who are driving the narrative, and it challenges each of us, people of faith, whether Judaism or Islam or Christianity, to somehow make our voices, our moderate voices, more clearly heard. And I think what you've done is given us the confidence to know what we should be doing and what we should be saying. So just to say thank you very, very much for your contribution, and fantastic. Thank you.
I second that. Thank you very much, Anne. That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Well, you've given us a lot of your time. Really appreciate that. We said we'd close at 3:30, although this is going to be open for networking after 3:30. So I'm just going to finish now, with your permission, by saying two prayers for peace. The first one is written by our own Sister Brigitta Rooney. Thank you, Sister Brigitta, in cahoots with CAFOD. And the other one is from Pax Christi, forward by Pat Gaffney, and it's a prayer by Thomas Merton. So first of all, Sister Brigitta's. May God give wisdom and courage to those who work for peace. We pray that their efforts may be blessed, that they may bring an end to violence and solace and stability to suffering peoples. May the gift of peace permeate all troubled souls, convert all who live by violence, and comfort all children who live in menacing situations, that the freedom to enjoy life and grow in safety may be theirs. And may each one of us know peace of mind and heart, peace of body and spirit, peace of community and world. Holy Spirit of peace, grant our prayer. Amen.
Amen.
And a final prayer to send you home. Thomas Merton. If you have the book, Peacemaking, Pax Christi, this is December the 30th. My Lord God, I have no idea where I'm going. I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end. Nor do I really know myself. And the fact that I think I am following your will does not mean that I am actually doing so. But I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you. And I hope I have that desire in all that I am doing. I hope that I will never do anything apart from that desire. And I know that if I do this, you will lead me by the right road, though I may know nothing about it. Therefore, I will trust you always, though I may seem to be lost in the shadow of death. I will not fear, for you are ever with me, and you will never leave me to face my perils alone. Well, thank you, everybody. It's been a good day, and it's been good to see you all. Next stop is the conference in July, and I hand over to Jeff.